Welcome to this next conversation in our series. And today we're talking with two folks from the Iowa Labor Center, and both John McKerley and Robin Clark-Bennett are with us today. And Robin is going to begin by just framing what the Labor Center does for us to position us as we enter this conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. So the Labor Center has been a unit at the University of Iowa since 1951, and we are the entity in the state, the only one in the Regent system that serves to conduct research and education for and about Iowa workers. And so we serve as an interdisciplinary unit that approaches the issue of work and workers from a historical, legal rights, and a organizational and structural lens. And we conduct classes for workers all across the state of Iowa. In normal times, we're fanning across the 99 counties, conducting education in community centers, libraries, union halls, VFW halls on the issues that people most are concerned about addressing in their work-related lives in languages and at times that they understand. And we're also honored. I mean, we're a bridge, and it's a two-way bridge. So we also serve a really exciting role of bringing back the stories and experiences of workers and connecting them with students and faculty who are researching those very issues to inform their research and experiences with workers' lives and the gaps that they face and the struggles and ideas and solutions that they've come up with.
And then another piece of the center, and certainly since it's been around since the early 50s, is this role of being a keeper of history. And John, could you tell us a little about that?
Sure. So I have the role of being the historian at the center, and I'm the current manager of something called the Iowa Labor History Oral Project, or ILHOP, which was it's an oral history project started by the labor movement, not by historians, and that is managed out of the Labor Center. In coordination with a bunch of other institutions, including the UI Libraries, the State Historical Society, and the Iowa Federation of Labor. So one of the things that, as I say, it's been going on since the 1970s, and so what that means is that some of the earliest memories that we have in the collection go back to people who were born at the turn of the 20th century. In the 1890s and the early decades of the 20th century. So, to connect to this issue of the pandemic, the current pandemic, we have lots of workers who can speak to the experience of other epidemic diseases, including the Spanish flu epidemic of the era around World War I. And so one of the things that I have been doing has been going through our records to find those stories and to pull them out and to see what relevance they have for workers' experience today. And one of the things that I think really comes out of those stories is the ways in which working class communities are often particularly impacted by epidemic disease, right? There's a story from one of the workers, Glenn Stiles, and he remembers his own family, which lived around Washington and Muscatine, Iowa, not being particularly directly affected, but he's almost sort of threw out as a kind of an aside that it was those workers who still had to work, right? Who couldn't go back to the farm, who couldn't remove themselves, that there in 1918, suffered the most. And then you have workers who, particularly those people who had been drafted and were preparing to go overseas at the very end of World War I, who remembered the incredible impact of the epidemic on the soldiers at Camp Dodge, in particular, this military camp by Des Moines, and it's harrowing accounts of the of the human toll that the disease took, and again, quite graphic accounts of soldiers' bodies stacked up 10 high and 3 coffins across, being taken out of Camp Dodge by workers, by Teamsters, into the city to be embalmed. Yeah, I mean, like I say, it's only because of things like ILHOP, because they exist, that's allowed us to have this kind of deep historical record of workers' experiences in Iowa.
Mm-hmm. Do you have any recollections from medical workers from that era?
I unfortunately no, but I do have a kind of a sideways example that I discovered when working on this, which is that there's the Library of Congress actually has what's the right word to describe it? It was a sort of honorary, I don't believe it's an honorary certificate, I think is the right word, that was presented to the family of a Minnesota woman who was a Red Cross and Army nurse who came to Camp Dodge, and again, right here in the middle of the pandemic, and died several days later of the disease herself. And so we ILHOP don't have any records of those medical workers, but they certainly exist, and they certainly were there.
Mm. So you were talking about making this, bridge between Robin, the work of the center to places across the state, and it's so interesting to hear these memories that are coming from different people, like in the Muscatine area, and of what's going on in Des Moines in 1918, and now of course we have people creating memories of this current time. And so, Robin, you were sharing that you're just hearing from people from all kinds of labor. I asked what occupations you're hearing from, and you basically said everyone. So if you could just give a slice of who you're hearing from, and also then to reflect on this notion of that we were talking about before, of what is essential. So kinds of people you're hearing from, and then how this term essential is landing.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, first, I just want to convey my deep respect for the workers across the state who we've long worked with and known the essential nature of the work that they do, but whose importance is now more visible than ever, and should have been really long before this. But we are hearing, especially now it's important that we have these relationships in place. And so we've been able to immediately initiate communication with workers, and they've likewise initiated communication with us about the questions they have about rights that are changing every single day now, and guidances and policies that are ever changing. And so it's been, we've been really proud to help research and assimilate that information into videos and literature and in multiple languages so that people can access that. But we're particularly hearing now from people on the two ends of the spectrum. On the one hand, workers who are who we see in the news really painfully, struggling to protect their health and safety, doing work that they're proud to do, that they know is important to our nation, but who are struggling to protect their health and safety and the safety of their families. And so, unfortunate parallels in some cases to meatpacking workers and factory workers at the 100 years ago, struggling against a pandemic and trying to make their workplaces safe in that context. And then on the other hand of the spectrum, we're hearing from workers who are tossed aside without much protection right now, and are struggling, unemployed, trying to apply for benefits and survive economically, who are out of work in restaurants and hotels, temp workers who, earn so little that they don't have a safety net to fall back on. So, I think of we've been hearing from temporary workers at factories who are called temporary workers, but have worked there for years and years and years in that very unstable status, or gig economy workers who are considered self-employed and aren't subject to the laws and safety nets that our system has traditionally provided, but who've had to be folded into that out of necessity. I mean, there's been a recognition in the pandemic unemployment assistance that we can't leave those workers out, or a huge sector of our economy will be left with no support whatsoever. And then, of course, immigrant workers who the millions of people who do essential work in our communities and don't have documents, who are excluded from those protections. And from unemployment compensation, and are going to really fight for survival. So we're hearing from people on that broad spectrum of experiences.
And is there, you mentioned before, like hearing from postal workers.
Mm-hmm.
So can you give an example of like how you're working with them, and what are some of the concerns that you're hearing?
Yeah, so certainly industries like meatpacking have captured, for really important reasons, are the national dialogue. And meanwhile, there are workers in many other sectors who are also working every day and struggling to assert their rights and to protect themselves. So postal workers are still out every single day. We count on them still delivering medications more than ever to deliver our packages and our and do our shopping for us, essentially deliver our online shopping to our doors. And so, for example, at some of the distribution centers in Des Moines, we've been in dialogue with the union there that has been working to really activate its existing communication structures and have constant discussion with their members to identify risks, talk with us and learn about how the laws that are constantly changing apply to them, and then work with their members to find solutions and propose those solutions to the employer, and work out on a day-to-day basis, work out new systems and new protocols to protect people's safety. Similar stories.
Are there creative, I can't think of the right word, fixes? I don't know. I mean, are you seeing some creative, positive, attempts to address this?
Absolutely. And I'll say there's some employers who are really open, have been very open to working with workers and their organizations, and some that have resisted it. I mean, that is across the board, and those who are really openly working with, open to working with their employees to find solutions should really be commended. But I think that this moment has really underscored the importance of frontline workers receiving information, being involved in the decision making, because every industry is different, right? So you talk to UPS drivers and truck drivers about things like, should two people be in the cab at the same time doing deliveries, which had sometimes been the standard, but for the purpose of social distancing. Meatpacking workers understand best the dynamics of the speed of the line and how the system is structured in terms of how social distancing can be possible. Each worker in each department within an industry, right, knows their work and knows the points at which people come into close proximity, knows how protective equipment can work or not work, and have really important ideas. So when that's paired with national guidances from OSHA, when that's paired with health and safety experts nationally who we're, in dialogue with, people can really and are coming up with really ingenious solutions.
Mm-hmm. And one thing that we wanted to touch on for sure was around workers' rights. And so you're alluding to that, they're changing. I think many of us have a sense that workers' rights have been so stripped down, and that we're now really seeing the vulnerability of that. And then you were also, John, wanting to remind us that, and them, that anybody listening, that workers perhaps have more rights than they sometimes realize.
Oh, right. Well, and I want to sort of jump on the last point too, which is that, sometimes the history of work, of workers' rights and of the labor movement is presented as a rise and fall story, and that we're living just in a decline. But the reality is that when you actually look at what workers are doing, that there's constant innovation, right? That workers are constantly coming together to try to solve their own problems in their workplaces. And, even as overall union density has declined, that hasn't stopped workers from constantly trying to innovate to solve their own problems, right? And you can only see those stories, though, if you get past the sort of official data of density and actually listen to them tell their stories, right? That's one of the great things about my job, is that I get to record those stories. But yeah, and so I'll kick it back to Robin, though, again, in the sense that that one of the primary things that the Labor Center does is that it helps remind workers and educate workers about all the rights they still do have, even in all sorts of workplaces, even as we have entered this period of the last 50 years or so, when there has been a concerted effort by employers and their allies to strip away and make it more difficult for workers to exert their rights. But as it turns out, that workers do in fact have them, especially when working with each other in forms of concerted activity. And I don't know. I mean, Robin, do you want to elaborate on that? Because it's one of the things that the labor educators do so well.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the role of institutions like ours and community-based organizations have become really important because, I mean, let's acknowledge, as you're saying, Jennifer, that workers' rights and the agencies that enforce them have been badly damaged by deregulation and austerity and shrinking budgets. And so more and more, it's incumbent upon workers to assert their own rights. No one's coming to save many people. It's up to them and their communities to assert their rights, work with employers, and find solutions. And so in that context, we are producing educational materials in multiple languages. We just produced a video on workplace health and safety to try to boil down many of these complex legal concepts into very accessible, understandable information in Spanish and English, and we're working on other languages. People often are not finding out information by Googling the U.S. Department of Labor website, right? They're hearing from people that they trust and asking and looking for credible information from trusted sources. So that's a role that we're playing right now. But it's, I think many people are talking about what should the world of work look like coming out of this crisis, and I think it's very clear that this has exposed the sort of yawning gaps and holes in our systems, and the ways in which many of our protections were designed for an economy that we don't live in anymore, in terms of the gig workers and people who are just left out.
I want to go deeper into that, but first I want to just thread back to John and the project that started this semester with some undergraduates in journalism. And if you could just tell us a little bit about that, and then some of the stories they're collecting.
Sure. So again, I mean, one of the ways that the center supports the teaching mission, undergraduate and graduate at the university, is by giving opportunities for students, conventional students at the university, to be connected to the work that we do. And one of the ways we were doing that this last semester in the spring was I was working with a journalism professor, Daniel Lothrop, on an audio documentary class. And so we had prepared a syllabus whereby the students would be doing archival research in ILHOP, and then doing additional reporting to produce audio documentaries on a range of topics. But of course, one topic, the pandemic, overwhelmed that plan. And so we pivoted and prepared opportunities for the journalism students to continue to do similar kinds of work, to do fresh and new reporting, but on this topic, this one topic. And I was able to, because of the reach, the distinct connections that the Labor Center has with workers all around the state, to be able to connect those students with a whole variety of different kinds of workers doing all kinds of work and facing all kinds of challenges and struggles. And so again, was able to offer those students the opportunity to connect with those workers. So that's where we're at right now, is that the students are out gathering that reporting, and hopefully by the end of the semester we should have some really amazing work by undergraduates, facilitated by the connections of the Labor Center.
And I think today is the last day of the semester, so.
Oh, well, yeah. So
Yeah.
The timelines are.
Can you give an example of like a kind of person, an interview that's taken place, just to give us a sense of who they're talking to?
Sure. So we were trying to get out of, again, meatpacking is so important, but there's a lot of these stories that are being lost in the national media is at least at this point doing a pretty good job of covering that story. So we wanted to highlight some of these less exposed stories. So they're doing work with some federal employees, the VA and letter carriers, as well as some industrial workers. So we've got, there aren't just meat packing plants in Iowa, right? There are also other kinds of food production plants. And in particular, there's some workers in Muscatine who do work creating things like Vienna sausages, this kind of work. And so we've got people, students doing interviews with those workers, as well as let's see, trying to click through my head. I had a good list. Some healthcare workers, right? We have workers all across the state, nurses who are organized around the state. So it's trying to capture some of those less known stories.
Great, thank you. So to end, I just want to return to that notion of the future of work, and some hopes that each of you have on what might come out of this, including how the university might participate in that, and some things that have been maybe broken for a while that perhaps this is an opportunity to address. And so Robin, would you mind talking to that first?
Sure. I mean, I think that these kinds of a crisis of this magnitude certainly can, perhaps one of the few bright spots is that it can create new discussion, invigorate new discussions and considerations of what's possible. So, we really look forward to continuing to connect the workers that we're in touch with around the work with other scholars and programs at the university that we regularly work with to continue to engage that discussion. One project that we're excited to get back to actually is a pre-apprentice program that the Labor Center has been working on to connect underrepresented groups that are underrepresented in the construction building trades industry with apprenticeship programs and really connect and prepare people to succeed in women, people of color, returning veterans, people returning from incarceration as well, with these opportunities, because the construction industry desperately, faces a very serious staffing shortage and desperately needs to bring in large numbers of skilled craftspeople for the construction jobs of the future. So that is a project we're already engaged in and really excited to continue. But I think it's hard to even know what other initiatives will arise out of this moment. But having that communication, trusted communication in place, is really exciting as we move forward to be able to continue those discussions.
John, any thoughts on the future of work?
So, again, to come back to one of the things we were talking about before, I've been thinking as a historian about, again, both these longer term and shorter in the sense of half a century as opposed to a century worth of changes. And, it's increasingly struck me, how in many ways we're living in fact, in many ways, I'm almost 45, and I feel like as though I have lived essentially my entire life in what is a new age of austerity that's been punctuated with some changes, some cross currents, but that, you know, for the most part has defined the last half century, especially the last 20 years. And what I hope will be the case is that, you know, this moment has, I hope will have galvanized people to begin to think again about alternatives, right? That, you know, that again, one of the messages of history, but it's also one of the messages of the labor movement, is that we make our own history, but we don't make it just as we please, right? To paraphrase a famous historian and philosopher, and that that the labor movement is as much about the future as it is about the past, and that we have to understand the past in order to chart our way to the future. But again, fundamentally, one of the lessons of the past is that because things change, and because they are constructed, right? They are made to be a certain way. They can be unmade, and they can be made in new and better images. And so again, for me, as a historian who studies the labor movement and who through the Labor Center is very much engaged with workers and with a living labor movement, I find it incredibly, you know, inspiring to be able to sort of sit at the heart of that, and to and to be part of a group of workers all around the state who I in fact I know are imagining how we can make some different and better decisions than the ones that have been made, you know, both in the short term and in the long term, that have put us where we are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and go ahead.
I was just going to say, I mean, to be more clear from the sort of more abstract answer, you know, I provided before. I mean, it's clear we need to recommit to workers' safety on the job in ways that we have not in recent years. It's clear that we need to recommit to living wages, and that's essential to all of our health and safety. When people are able to survive and work without having to rely on two jobs and live in poverty, and when they have a safety, an economic safety net, that makes us all more functional society and all safer at times like this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, certainly the interconnectedness is really coming to the fore, and we're seeing how if one group is not being treated well, it does ultimately affect all of us. Yeah. Thank you both so much, and thank you for the work that you're doing right now. I really appreciate it. So
thank you for hosting this series.